Today I'm going to show you how to check your miter saw for accuracy. We're going to be using two different methods. The first method we're going to use is my preferred method. It helps to accentuate the problem, makes it a lot more visible even if it is minute. I'm getting ready to make a picture frame and I just need to make sure that this saw is cutting good. So for the first method we're going to be using a 1x6. This is the best one that I could find. I've got my 4-foot level out here just to have a good look at this board. It has a slight bow to it, but it is not bad at all, and it's mostly on this end. We need two 22-inch pieces to get our angles cut and check the accuracy of our cuts. The second method we're going to use a speed square, and we're going to be using a combination square, and that's about all there is to it. I'm also going to show you how to correct any issues with the saw, if there are any, when we get done checking it for accuracy. Hi everybody, I'm Jim Dierdorf and this is Detroit DIY. Let's get started. I've got me two 22-inch pieces marked out here. I'm going to go ahead and get them cut. At this point in time, we just want to make sure that we're tight against the fence and that our rollers are not interfering if you're using a portable workstation, or in other words, to make sure that the board is sitting flat on the table. Nothing's holding it up from the table. In the very beginning, I forgot to mention that we're going to be using a digital angle finder. This is a Johnson angle finder. They're fairly inexpensive, and we are going to need this to check the bevel cut on the saw, and that's the first thing we're going to cut. So let's get started on that. I will be providing a link in the description for some of the tools that we'll be using today. If you use those links, it does not cost you any extra. However, I do get a small commission. The first thing we're going to need to do is get this thing turned on and zero it, but it already looks pretty happy at 0, but we're going to go ahead and zero it anyway. Now this is a magnetic base, but because it's sitting on the aluminum, it will not stick, so I'm holding it down a little bit to make sure that it's there. Now I do want to pick it up and set it down and make sure that it goes back to 0. If it doesn't, I'm going to put it back to 0 again. That's what we want. Now we're going to pull the saw guard up out of the way, and we are going to stick this right to the blade. With that stuck to the blade, we're reading 89.78. We're not getting to the 90 that we need to. So I'm going to loosen it up. I'm going to swivel it a couple of times and double check that. And we'll be fixing this with these bolts right here. Make sure there's no debris under here that may be holding us up. We are at 89.6. So let's loosen this bolt right here and adjust it just a little bit. So the blade needs to come towards me just a little bit more than what it is. And it's very minute, but it's enough that it may cause a problem with a cut. So we are just going to loosen this nut and hold the bolt in place and give it just a slight turn. And it's important that you retighten it because the bolt will move in the threads a little bit more. So now with that little bit of adjustment, we are at perfect 90 degrees or 0, however you would want to say that. Now we're just going to check the bevel on the 45 side and see what we have going on there. If to excuse my voice a little bit here, I'm fighting a cold, but we're going to get through this. So now with the saw beveled over to 45 degrees, we need to make sure that we get pretty close to the center. And we are bouncing between 45 and 45.1, 45. So I'm really happy with that. We don't need to touch that at all. But if you did, you would use the other bolt over here to adjust that out. So now that I've checked the bevel and I know that it's good, I'm going to go ahead and trim a little bit off of the ends of both of these boards. I'm also going to put an X on the side of the board that is against the fence. So that's important to me so that I know if this cut is not a 0 degree or a 90 degree cut, which way I need to adjust my blade. Once again, make sure we're tight against the fence. I'm also just going to put a little X right here so I know that this is the side I cut. And we're going to do this exact same thing with this one. And there we have it. Let's check them. So I have my combination square here, and I just want to come across the end of the board like this, making sure that you're snug against this side and see what we have going on. And I have a slight little gap right here on this end. I mean, it is maybe a 32nd of an inch. So that's why I want to use this longer board, because over a shorter board we may not be able to see this. For the majority of the work that I do with this saw, I wouldn't be concerned with that. But for what I want to do with it right now, I am concerned with that. So now that I see that it's on the outside of the fence, I know that my blade is cantilevered a little bit this way. I cut both boards on the same side of my saw, so that if this board should also check the same way. So it should be the exact same thing, a slight gap on this side. So what I want to do, just to avoid confusion, is just put me a little arrow right here so that I know that that's where my gap is. Now I want to do the exact same thing here and make sure that we have the exact same problem on this board and that I'm not getting a bad read off of the side. And we do. It's very, very minute, but it's about the same thing. Now, here's the thing. If 0 is off, then we already know that 45 is off because of the way that the saw is set up. So we really need to check 0 first and not jump right into a 45 and the other 45 and get ourselves confused. We need to check 0 first. If you don't have a combination square, another way to do this is to use a straight edge. So if we set this end that we cut, and then we take this end that we cut and we flip it over so that both of our gaps will be facing each other, and we slide them together. As you can see, we have a decent sized gap down here, but we're touching here. So that is what we need to correct out of the blade. It's not very much. As you can see, it's probably a 32nd of an inch, but you can see the kind of problem that it would create when you're trying to make a picture frame, or even if you were doing a glue up, you would wind up with that gap. So since I know my saw took a little bit too much on this side, I need to adjust it that way. Now this particular saw, I adjust this front plate right here, and that is what locks into place. There's some aluminum notches cut out in the framework itself, but they're much bigger than the notches in the steel plate. When I loosen these 3 screws, it will allow me to move this steel plate a little bit. Some saws you have to adjust the fence. That is not the case with this saw. The fence on this saw has recessed alignment holes, and the fence is non-adjustable. So you need to look at your saw, because not all saws adjust the same. Our blade tool also has our star bit on it, our Torx, to go ahead and get this loosened up. Now I don't want to loosen it up a bunch, just a little bit. And I'm going to set it in the 0 and see if I can't just nudge it the slightest. Now the second method you can do this is what I'm going to do, just to kind of give it a quick check here, is with a speed square. And we would put that against our fence, and then we will check it against our blade, making sure that it's not touching any of the carbides on the blade. You don't want it touching any of the carbides. It seems to be really close, but I'm not positive that it's moved. This is kind of why I like the method of cutting the wood as opposed to using the speed square. Now it has moved, it's obviously moved now, so I'll just keep tweaking it over and tweaking it over until it looks good, and then I will recut another piece of wood and see what we've got. There, it moved. I kind of like that. I'm going to snug it up right there. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, both on the same side of the fence and the same end of the board. Now we'll recheck them with the combination square. I'm going to check both sides just to make sure I'm getting the same thing. And I still see it to be a little off in the same place on this board. However, this board looks pretty good. So I'm going to flip this board over and fence this side just to see if there's any difference in what I'm getting. Now what I want to do is cut a 45 on here. My saw is not going to cut all the way through this 1x6, so I am going to show you how I'm going to take care of that. I want to cut off the least amount as possible So let's go ahead and cut it as far as it'll cut. Now I'm just going to go ahead and flip it around and finish that last little bit. We'll be recutting this 45. Actually, before I do that, before I cut it, I just want to get me a little reference line on here as to how far it cut, because I'm going to remove that piece. And that's not a horrible cut, but I want to concentrate everything off of this side of the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove about 1.5 inches of the board here. So I'm just going to leave it right here, set at 45. I'm going to come tight up against that, and I am going to cut that right out of the... just like that. I'm going to go ahead and get the other one done, and then I'll show you how we're going to remove that. So now with both of them cut, we're going to go ahead and just cut this out of the way. We'll stand it right up in here. I'm going to have to hold my guard out of the way for a minute. And there it is. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. Now I'm going to reset at 45 and just give these a trim. Also, my blade is dull. That's why you hear it kind of screaming like that a little bit. Now, let's get the saw out of the way, and we are going to check this for accuracy and see what we've got as far as a 45 is concerned. So I'm going to be using this 90-degree clamping square, and I'm going to set it right in here, and I'm going to go ahead and just clamp this, and then I know that it's at a true 90 degrees. Then I'm going to inspect any gaps that may result from it being at 90 degrees, and thusly it will better tell me what my saw is doing. So as you can see, we did not produce a nice 45. We have a gap right here on this side, so we need to go back and take another look at the saw. So what this is telling me is that my saw took too much material on this side, so that it needs to go back that way a little bit. So I'm going to nudge it back that way, the same thing I did. I'm going to loosen these 3 screws, and I'm going to nudge it back, and then I'm going to recheck for my straight cut. This saw is a job site saw. It gets thrown in the back of the truck, it gets hauled all over the place, it gets bounced around. We might be beyond having a perfect straight cut and a perfect 45-degree cut. I hope not, but it's not looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and nudge this back a little bit and get this 45 worked out, and then we'll check it again for straight cut. After some adjusting, a little bit this way, a little bit that way, just trial and error and a little bit of time, and I've got this looking really good. Now these are both cut from the same side, so what I want to do now is swing the saw 45 to the other side, trim these and fit them again and make sure they're good. Then I want to go back to 0 and check that. And I just want to add too, it doesn't matter if your miter saw is straight out of the box. You need to check these adjustments. You need to take the time, especially if you plan on making some precision cuts with them. And I still am not positive that I'm going to get 0 and 45, but we're about to find out. After about 15 more minutes of tweaking, I finally got something that I'm happy with. I'm not positive that these boards have some cupping. So the 45 miter, even though it looks like there's a little gap right here, once they're pushed down into place, it closes right up and they look good. So I also cut a couple of smaller strips, and I've got them set up here with my square. So as you can see, we're nice and tight. I've got my squaring clamp right here in the middle, and we have a very nice consistent fit. So I'm really happy with what I got. I'm glad that the saw does not have an issue. It just took a little bit more tweaking to get it to be exactly what I want. And I think the cupping in these boards was tricking me a little bit. So I'm glad that I grabbed a couple of other pieces of wood just to try and see how they would fit together. I hope this video has helped you get your miter saw squared away if you're having any issues with it. It's not always fun in the shop. Obviously, sometimes we have to check this stuff. I knew it had a little bit of a problem and that it was going to need some adjustments. Now that I know it's cutting properly, I'll be able to move on to the next project. So next week we'll be able to build a picture frame that's actually going to turn out square. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider doing so. Remember always to respect the power of your power tools. We'll see you soon.